The ePADD Plus project is enhancing the very well-known open source ePADD system for email archiving with new long-term preservation function. One quick word about our nomenclature. ePADD Plus, we use that to refer to the project that is extending the capabilities of the ePADD product. ePADD will continue under its longstanding identity under that name. As we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session for those who were not able to attend in person today. And we have also enabled live transcripts. Depending on your client, you may need to turn that on. On the Windows client that I have, it's one of the icons at the bottom of the screen. It will be interesting to see how well that technology deals with some of our more obscure terminology. So to begin with, let's review the agenda for today. We will start off with an introduction to the background, some of the use cases, objectives, and timeline of the ePADD Plus project. And then we will move on to a set of facilitated breakout sessions for a more focused discussion on topics of training, testing, sustainability, and community engagement. There's quite a number of you here, so we will be sort of assigning you randomly to one of 5 breakout groups, all of which will be addressing the same 3 sort of high-level topical areas. While we are very, very glad to have this opportunity to present our work to you, we're also very interested in hearing back from you. So we've built in plenty of time for questions and discussion, and I think there will even be a couple of online polls that we'll be asking you to respond to. We also have people monitoring the chat, so please feel free to post questions anytime if there's something that is unclear. Any questions about anything else, please put that in there and we'll accumulate that and try to address them at appropriate places. If you feel like answering our icebreaker question, which is shown up there at the top of the screen, please do so. What and perhaps when was your first email address? I know in my case, I can't remember. It was probably back around 1985. It was probably a very strange thing because that was before RFC 2045 sort of standardized our current MIME-based email. We are very delighted that so many of you have joined us today. As Tricia said, over 120 registrants, and let's see, we're up over 80 that are actually here today. I think that those numbers is very indicative of the importance and interest in email archiving and is suggestive of sort of the pent-up demand for effective archiving solutions. As I hope we'll be able to let you see, we believe the work we're doing on this project is addressing, at least in part, that demand. Of course, email, I don't have to tell you, is thoroughly integrated into pretty much all aspects of life in the digital age. And no future understanding of our time will be possible without recourse to archived email as vital documentary evidence. If you were to visit the Harvard archives, now that we're opening up again, you would have access to the original mail correspondence of the first Harvard president, Increase Mather, from over 340 years ago. More topically, you could also read the 100-year-old paper correspondence of President Lowell when he wrote extensively about Harvard's response to the 1918 influenza pandemic. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going to be available 100 years from today? In 2021, will we have the email that current President Bacow just sent out to all of us on staff about giving an update on the university's response to the COVID pandemic? Well, we'd like to think, in fact, that we will have that email available for future scholars, and that the work we're doing today with ePADD is going to provide an important foundation for effective long-term stewardship of email as a vital part of all of our collections. Next slide, please, Tricia. The success of the ePADD project, of course, is possible only through the cooperation of many participants. Harvard Library and the University of Manchester are the two formal project partners. Although not formally attached to the grant, Stanford Libraries, as the originator and the owner of the ePADD system, is providing us with very, very valuable consultation, as is Amuse Labs, which is the technical team that was used and was continuing to be used by Stanford for the development of ePADD. Some of the software work for the ePADD Plus project will also be performed under contract by Sartography, a Virginia-based technology company. This is a great team, and we're really grateful for everyone's participation. Funding for ePADD Plus comes from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation through a re-grant program that is administered by the University of Illinois. You'll hear a little bit more about that later on. Now, we'd like to briefly introduce three prior strands of independent activity that have now converged into the ePADD Plus project. So I will start by turning the microphone over to my colleague, Sally DeBush from Stanford. Sally?
Hi, everyone. So a team at Stanford has been continuously developing the ePADD software since 2013, and in 2019, we were awarded a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to continue that work. Starting in January 2020, I see 2020 is missing on the slide, and wrapping up in March of this year. We focused on three major development tasks for this period. That included creating a new attachment review feature, which is pictured on the slide, developing a shared multi-institutional email discovery platform, which will be launching soon, and improving the software's performance for large email collections of up to 2 million messages. But we also identified collaboration with other institutions working on similar projects related to email processing and preservation as another major focus for that period. And so that's when we started to partner with Harvard University and the University of Manchester, who had their own ongoing projects in the space to ensure that our individual projects were well aligned. And I'll turn it over to Tricia.
Thanks, Sally. So over at Harvard Library, what was going on is that we have had our own homegrown email archiving system that we called EASE. I think it was Electronic Archiving System or Email Archiving System. And it was originally developed in 2011 to facilitate processing and preservation of email records. But over the past decade, many tools like ePADD have started populating the landscape. And because EASE is an open source, it was really difficult to have it interact with those other tools to, if we wanted to acquire email with one, process and preserve with EASE, do access and discovery with another one. And then in 2018, if any of you have read the Future of Email Archives report, it was published by CLEAR, and one of their primary recommendations was the improved integration between email archiving tools that had emerged. So I'm going to actually link to that here. I'm going to pop that in the chat. It's a really great report. Some of the folks that were on that task force are probably here today, and I highly recommend reading it. So Harvard Library's initial response to this was to redeploy EASE as an open source tool for better interoperability and sustainability. And simultaneously, we entered into the collaboration with Stanford, which Sally talked about, to better align ePADD and EASE so that we can minimize needless replication of function and support more seamless interoperation between the two. And we were all set to start development on converting EASE to an open source tool at the start of 2020. But then the pandemic hit and we had a hiring freeze and our library's strategic priorities changed drastically. And we had to kind of reposition ourselves to see like how we could still achieve our objectives, but in a more, advantageous way. So meanwhile, I'll turn it over to Jess from the University of Manchester to talk about what they were up to.
Thank you, Tricia. So the University of Manchester Special Collections have been preserving email archives, particularly the email archive of indie poetry publisher Carcanet Press, since about 2012. The collection stands at presently 800,000 items, and it's stored in our digital records repository, for which we use Preservica. So when we examined ePADD, it was clear that it was going to meet almost all of our requirements for email appraisal and management. And we also spent some time actually adapting ePADD's delivery module to create a pilot site which gives online access to the full text of a small set of test email. So in late 2019, we were awarded funding from Arts Council England to continue our work on email archives. The project is called Providing Access to Large Literary Archives in a Digital Medium, or Palladium for short, and its relevant outputs are included on the slide. Sadly, as with Harvard's work, Palladium was delayed owing to the pandemic, but I'm happy to say we were able to begin the project in February this year. So whilst we were waiting, we realized we were going to need to be a bit more flexible to continue to make progress. So we used some of our developer support that was freed up by the delay in Palladium to support Stanford in their 2020 round of ePADD development work. And that's it for me. Handing back to Stephen.
Thank you, Jess, and Trisha and Sally. As hopefully is clear from their comments, you can see that all of us were already working on a variety of individual tracks of email-related activity, and all of which was somewhat coalescing around the use of ePADD. So we had been originally having some initial conversations about, well, eventually down the road, wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out a way to sort of converge things? You know, how many separate tools and systems does the community need? Of course, the pandemic really made that question a little more critical. And luckily, at the same time, the Illinois Regrant program came up, and I think provided a wonderful impetus for us to work together rather than continuing to work apart. And we think that, as is so often the case, there's really tremendous natural synergy between our goals, our needs, our experiences, our expertise, and that we're going to be able to do something really, really important, both to all of us as well as to all of you and the wider community. So you've now heard a little bit about what we've been doing and thinking about, and we'd like to turn things around very briefly and hear a bit from you. So I think now is the time for our first poll. So if you could take a minute or two and please respond, it would be really interesting to see sort of how things break down in terms of which folks are actively engaged in email archiving now, which have immediate plans, which are just not quite sure, and hopefully a very small category, people who are not planning on doing anything about it.
I'm tracking how many people have voted, so when it starts slowing down here, I'll end it. You can see our answers.
Okay, so while we're sort of waiting for that, maybe we can come back later on and give a little snap. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, well over half are actually doing something, and another 40% either have immediate plans or would like to have some plans. So hopefully the information you'll be getting here today will be very helpful in sort of crystallizing your intentions in that regard. Great, thank you. Very interesting. That was a little bit higher. I was kind of afraid that there was going to be more falling into some of those lower level categories, but that's great to hear. Let's see. Okay, if we could move on then, talking about project objectives. The overall objective of the ePADD Plus project is to integrate long-term preservation functionality such as exists in the current Harvard E system, and bring that into Stanford's ePADD. I think if folks could mute themselves, we're getting a little bit of crosstalk. Thank you. As I said, putting preservation functionality into ePADD which already provides a platform for fairly comprehensive archival appraisal, processing, and discovery. And also because of some of the work that Manchester has been doing, it also now has some enhanced function with regard to delivery, particularly of full text searching and so forth. So our intention in this project is to provide a single enhanced product that is going to provide the archival community with a single unified tool that supports the full gamut of the email archiving lifecycle much more robustly and maturely. Now, because preservation infrastructures and workflows vary greatly across institutions, the enhanced ePADD will support functions for local customization and extensibility to make sure that this new preservation function will be broadly applicable for very diverse institutional needs and contexts. This will be tested as part of the project through application of integration, interoperation of ePADD with our three partner institutions. So both Stanford and Harvard have developed fairly sophisticated customized repository solutions, Harvard's DRS and Stanford's SDR. And Manchester, as you heard from Jess, makes use of Preservica. So we're going to make sure that that the outputs of ePADD are going to be easily brought into those very diverse environments, and hopefully that will act as an exemplar for additional work for integration to other repository systems. Going into a little bit more detail about the functionality, it breaks down into a couple of high-level items. To begin with, we are going to be allowing ePADD to accept email in two new formats, EML and PST, which are widely, well, certainly PST, which is the Microsoft format, and that will be alongside of current support for Mbox and IMAP. While the native forms of the email that are brought in will be retained, we will also be creating a new normalized internal representation. Critically, ePADD in future will ensure the archival original order of the email. That is to say, we'll be keeping all of the email headers and all of the multi-part body sections, both true bodies and attachments. The headers in particular is something that ePADD currently does not retain, which is understandable since it was originally developed without the preservation use case in mind. But for archival purposes, of course, there's a lot of really important information that's packed in there, so we want to make sure that we're keeping that. All of the internal processing of email in terms of appraisal, perhaps normalization, removals, redactions, and so forth, all of that will now be documented as event-based change history. And that history, along with the email itself, potentially in both its native as well as normalized form, will then be able to be packaged together in a variety of configurable structures for export from ePADD and easy import into external preservation infrastructures. We can sort of see how this would work in this high-level diagram. Okay, so what we're showing here, everything that's sort of highlighted in red represents new features that will be put into place during our project. So we're sort of showing the high-level ePADD architecture, which you may know, although it presents itself through its UI as a single uniform thing, there are actually three independent processing units under the covers: appraisal, processing, discovery, and delivery. And information sort of gets passed externally between those three things, those four things. So the enhancements we'll be doing are primarily focused on the appraisal and the processing modules. So for appraisal, as mentioned, we'll be now accepting PST and EML. There will be some format conversions, so we'll be able to do free conversion between those three email formats, PST, email, and mbox. We will now be writing out a persistent representation of the email, which is new because no one probably realizes this, but once email is processed by ePADD today, the actual body of the email itself is no longer kept. All that's kept is a searchable index along with the attachments. So it's very important, again, for us to keep both the native format as well as the normalized format, which we're thinking maybe EML, although that's still a bit of an open question. Then on the processing side, we'll have a new packaging, export packaging function that will produce a variety of forms. So there will be essentially packages that are optimized for our three particular repository systems, DRS, Preservica, and SDR. And there will also be a sort of a generic output package that will be based on a bag. And in fact, it might be based on a new evolving recommendation called mailbag that we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's turn on, as mentioned, funding for this project has come to us through the Illinois re-grant program, which is known as Email Archives, Building Capacity and Community. This is a 4-year effort to build that capacity in archives, libraries, and museums, and it aims to develop a very broad community of institutions that are capable of preserving email as an important part of their research collections. The program is funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and it is organized around the set of recommendations that came from from the Task Force on Approaches for Email Archives that was established by the Mellon Foundation and the Digital Preservation Coalition. Maybe about 5 years ago now. And these recommendations can be found in that clear publication, The Future of Email Archives, that Tricia already mentioned a little bit earlier on. It makes, if you're interested in email archiving, it's that's really sort of required reading. I would urge you to do so if you haven't already. Illinois anticipates making 2 rounds of awards, and the ePADD Plus project is in the first cohort, along with 4 others. And you can read about them. They're all doing really, really interesting things at this URL that Tricia just posted to the chat. There's appear to be a lot of good opportunities for cooperation between the 5 projects. And in particular, there's one that is hosted at the University of Albany in New York, that is called Mailbag, which is developing a standardized specification for the structure and form of a bag-based package for email for purposes of transfer. And as I said, we will probably be using that as our sort of generic export option, because it's been designed to be able to be brought into any kind of an environment. In terms of the timeline, the ePADD project is structured in terms of 3 primary phases spread across 18 months of activity. We are now completing the first phase, which is planning and design, and we're very eager to start moving into the second development phase. As part of the design phase, if you haven't already done so, please review and comment on our public requirements document, which is available and open for another week or so, I think, right? We've already gotten back a lot of really good feedback, and we'd like to hear more. I'll also mention that later on in the development cycle, there will be an open call for beta testers. So please consider whether you would like to be able to do that. Oh, yes. And in addition to reviewing the requirements, if you have other use cases that may not be captured in the current requirements, please do so there. We'd like to hear from you. We're very eager to make sure that this is meeting widespread community needs. I See, we're coming up on 11:30, at least where we are on the East Coast of the US. So according to our schedule, I think it's time to switch over to our breakouts.
And
so
I
Trishka,
think
do you want to introduce that, please?
yeah, and I have everyone pre-populated, but I think we wanted to just pause for a second for general questions. I think some have come through. Paul, you can call what's come through in the chat, and then
Yes, of
and then
course.
we can just pop in to breakout rooms.
Yes, there's been plenty of answers to your icebreaker question, by the way, which seems to have been very popular. And there's some very positive comments in there as well. The most recent questions come in from Carrie. Is the attachment work mentioned at the beginning of the meeting in collaboration or separate from the EA-BCC project attachment converter, preserving the context of Electronic Correspondence University of Chicago Library?
It is independent of that, but as I mentioned, we were delighted to learn about that project because again, it does seem like there might be some obvious room for us to work together and to learn and perhaps even repurpose some of their project outputs.
Okay, and I think there was another question here from Kieran. I think it was in relation to change history. And he's just perhaps using premise events. That's the suggestion from Kieran, I think it is.
That is our current thinking, is that we would represent that change history through premise events that would again would get packaged up and would be a component of the standard export package.
You are amazing, Stephen. Apparently, to Kieran.
Oh, I'm assuming that's not to me personally, but
collectively,
but to my colleagues. Yes, so I'm happy to accept that encomium on behalf of everyone else.
We just had another one come in from Linda. So, is capturing Gmail or other web-based emails included in the future planning?
Yes, certainly. I would say so. Obviously, you have to scope a project. There's only a certain amount of monies available, a certain amount of work that you can do, and the choices for the formats we wanted to deal with were driven by the needs of the project partners.
Although I will add that you can currently do IMAP, export from Gmail. Thank you, Glenn, for mentioning that. So there is some functionality there to support that. Since we're at 11:30, we have some topics we wanted to cover today and get everyone's feedback on around testing and tool, sustainability and everything. Each room that I'm about to pop everyone into has a facilitator and a note taker from our team. So we'll spend the next 30 minutes going through those topics. And when we come back, we'll just talk about one point from each of the rooms, but all of the notes will be in this communal document for everyone to review. And I'm just gonna pop you in now. And I will send everyone a warning before I close them. All right, you ready?
Okay, I think are we all back here? Looks like 60 of us, so we may have had a little bit of attrition, but that's understandable. It's an hour and a half is a big commitment to ask of people. So I know in our breakout, Glenn and I were leading. We had it was really helpful, really productive. So I thought what we would do now is we would just have a very sort of brief round robin by the various facilitators and just sort of emphasize one key point that came out pretty strongly, and it could be related to any of the three topics. So well, why don't I go first so I make sure no one grabs my thing. Probably the one that pops out the most of us came up in the first topic about training, and people really expressed a very strong desire for really comprehensive set of written documentation, not to exclude other types, but they wanted to have that as a ready reference potentially including, screenshots that really help sort of walk you through work of the system. And if I can do like one A, we also had an interesting, it's tied into that. It had to do with who's the audience, and there was no uniformity. There were certainly, there's sort of the obvious, the professional archivist as one audience, where you can assume a certain level of technical sophistication, but there's also interest in applying this to a non-professional audience. The thing came up about dealing with donor requests. Can we actually give a tool like this to a donor to allow him or her to pre-select before stuff even comes into us? So again, that has an implication about a very, very different type of, or tone or tenor of written documentation. So Trisha, do you want to sort of, I'm not sure who's leading.
We have, let's see, Sally, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. There was a really interesting suggestion about testing from our group, which is that it would be very helpful to have some way for people who are testing to actually kind of communicate with each other and see how testing is going for the rest of the testing pool. So, some ideas were possibly Google group, maybe discourse, but just a way to kind of have a community around testing itself.
That's a really good idea. Ian, how about yours?
Thanks, Tricia. Yeah, actually, we had the same conversation, Sally, in our group, but I would pick out something else actually around testing, which I thought was interesting when we discussed it, and it was the contrast between doing kind of local testing on a kind of somebody's local environment versus kind of having a common test infrastructure, and the sort of pros and cons of the different approaches. And I think we kind of concluded that it's useful to do both. It's useful to be able to do sort of in situ testing in your local environment, but there's potential issues with that. Without a common data set or a common infrastructure, it's quite often difficult to resolve problems, particularly with software and installation problems and things like that. So actually, in terms of the approach for testing, we might want to think about a more holistic approach and try and support people doing that localized testing, but also provide some kind of central infrastructure and potentially or a common data set that we can all kind of work with.
Okay, yeah, I like that. We've been talking about a little bit about that, about test sets, the kind of universal test sets for testing like this. Jess, how about yours?
We had a very similar conversation actually about testing. Those points came up for us, which gives us a lot to think about. I think it's really important for us to be considering that at this point. But I'd say for us in the education and training documentation section, what was really interesting to me was the suggestion that Kieran made about potentially hosting it in GitHub, so that other people could contribute. And because the point was made that these things sometimes get out of date quite quickly. So when we've finished and we've handed it over, would it be interesting to be able to allow people to say, oh, look, now that we've updated ePADD, this bit's changed, and maybe we could add something new in. So I thought that was a really interesting idea for us to consider.
That's great.
Great.
Yeah, Stephen, I'll turn.
Sure. So I talked about training, and seems like there was a rigorous discussion about testing. I'm wondering if I could just ask if anyone would like to highlight any key point that came up maybe in the third discussion regarding community development. I'm afraid I let things run a little too long. We didn't have a lot of time in my group. Bad on me, but I'm hopeful that some of the others had some chance. And is there something key thing that came out that we could keep in mind in order to promote a very engaged community?
Comment from Nathan on open source documentation being really useful from a sustainability standpoint.
Yeah, definitely.
The recent Educopia publication on community cultivation of sustainability of communities is also a great kind of example guide that might be useful for the community.
Great, excellent suggestion. Okay. Hopefully you found that a useful exercise. I think I could speak for all of my colleagues that we certainly did. We have a bit of time built into the schedule now. If there are any sort of more open-ended questions that may have been instigated by anything you've heard, or perhaps something you didn't hear but we're hoping to hear, we certainly have some time to talk about that. I don't know if maybe is there anything else that's been popping up in chat? Is there any things that we have not addressed so far? I haven't been able to keep up with that, I'm afraid.
I see Carrie has her hand raised. Carrie, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Kari Smith from MIT. One of the, hi Tricia, one of the things in the past that have come up with ePADD and sort of the open source email is like government archives sort of in general, and the difficulty that, that we know that a lot of government archives have, state or federal, around open source software. And I'm just curious if working, like how to possibly address that, or is that something that even if we can't do it, if the ePADD project can't do that, looking at ways to address that, at least in documentation or something? Because I think that, it's sort of like you hear this tool and you're like, this is great, and yet we can't use it. But why not? Like even just knowing that, like what is it about it that might be a blocker? And within BitCurator EDU right now, we're working on like what are blockers, what's good about it, why can it work, and then various stakeholders, which includes sectors. And even having some of that kind of information put out might be very useful to the communities over time.
Great, thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, Kari, I hear that. It would be really great because a couple of government institutions or like state government places have done some really great work on their own kind of tools that government institutions can use. And it'd be great if we could be able to kind of point at each other. Like if you can't use this, this is why. Maybe you could try this instead. I'm thinking of Rick Ferrante. What's their tool? The Smithsonian tool. I'm blanking on that.
Dark mail.
Dark mail. Yeah. Yes, thank you. And being able to point.
Also, yeah, Utah State has done some good stuff as well, and over time, with COSA stuff.
Hi, Kari. This is Holly from NASA. I just wanted to say thank you for that, for bringing that up. And one of the things that we've run into with NASA being a federal government agency is security. So end of life or security vulnerabilities with dependent applications within systems. For instance, we ran into this using Artifactual's Atom with the PHP being end of life. So just those kinds of, I mean, if the documentation could support, any of those applications that might have some vulnerabilities, because we are up against pretty rigid security compliance standards. So that's definitely something. So we love the idea of open source, using what the tools that the community is using, but we certainly do run into those issues around security. And in the government, IT security, they claim to hate open source. So that's constantly an issue, a struggle, but thank you.
Yeah, even knowing, like, can it be run offline? Because I know with Lincoln Labs, the other part of MIT that is secure, they were having trouble also with tools where, like, there was still something that you might need to do with an external network. How much of ePADD can you use completely offline on the air-gapped machine, for instance? Like, that documentation would be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And ePADD, of course, is a desktop application. It is not inherently networked, so it does lend itself, if necessary, to that kind of secure deployment and operation. Kieran, I see you have had your hand up for a bit. Do you want to jump in and ask something or comment?
Oh, hi. Yeah, well, I'm just wondering, what's the story with next steps for those of us who might want to get involved with testing? Like, Is it a case of waiting for a new build to come and there'll be a certain date, or is development happening right now? And can we test something out, and where would we give feedback and stuff?
Sure. So maybe Trisha and Jess, our co-project leads, can respond to that.
I'm going to repop all the links in from this page real quick and that's going to be for the open call for comment on our specs, which is open for 1 more week. And then on a rolling basis, we have a place for you to submit use cases and sign up to be on our testing list. So I'll pop all those in the chat right now. And they're also in our open agenda. And we'll circulate all this to all the registered attendees after the meeting as well. So thanks for that.
Yeah,
Cheers.
we're not quite to the point of being able to enlist you, but we're going to hold you to it. You know, on paper, this project started in January, but as you could all imagine, you know, we got off to a very slow start, you know, naturally. So we're not quite as far along as we would have liked to have been, but I think we are now poised to really jump into the development effort, and we're hopeful we'll get something out as soon as we can, because we really want to get your feedback early and hopefully often. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns?
I think
Thank
we
you,
can
Kieran.
probably wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay then. Well, if something occurs to you later, certainly don't feel shy, and you can contact us. There'll be a couple of email addresses on a subsequent slide. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, talking about communication, we wanted to highlight that there are going to be a couple of follow-on public presentations about the ePADD Plus work. I know I'm going to be talking about it as part of 2 panels that our colleagues at Illinois have put together that'll be presenting on all 5 of the first round awardees. One is going to take place next week, actually, at the Best Practices Exchange Conference. I think that panel is on Tuesday, which will be May 18th. In the afternoon in the US, well, in Cambridge, which of course is the center of the US. And then later in August, there'll be another similar panel at the annual meeting of the Society of American Archivists, which I suspect many of you are familiar with and may have already been planning on attending, virtually attending. I'm not sure exactly how they're organizing that there. I think, you know, there's going to be sort of feedback sessions. So, but it is on the calendar. So please look for that. And undoubtedly over the course of the year, there'll be other opportunities. We'll be doing similar things. Also, let me turn over to Sally for just a bit to talk about some thinking we've been doing about the development of a users forum and sort of reusing the existing mailing list for that purpose. So
Yeah,
Sally, you want to
thanks,
say something?
Stephen. Just a quick plug. In our previous grant cycle, we formed a working group to design some new screens for the shared ePADD discovery site, which we'll be launching soon. So maybe 7 or 8 archivists that worked on that project, and we all felt that it would be really valuable to continue to meet. We were having really good discussions, not just about ePADD, but about email more broadly. And we'd love to expand that group and open it to anyone else who is working with email or has an interest in email. We meet once a month for an hour. It's very informal. We are aiming to create a welcoming space for people who are working on these types of projects. So we haven't picked an area to focus on next, but some of the ideas that we are talking about are like privacy in email, guidelines for creating email processing description and documentation, defining levels of processing for email, methods and tools for email data visualization, and maybe a project to collect public domain email samples for testing purposes. So If any of that sounds interesting to you, if you're looking for a home to talk about email, we would absolutely love to have you. I think, oh yeah, Trisha put the link in the chat. So the way to express interest would be to join that list, and then I will follow up with you. Our next meeting is on June 2nd. So yeah, we'd love to have you.
Great. Thank you, Sally. So I think that will let us start to wrap things up here today. We would like to thank you all so much for tuning in and participating so significantly. You've really provided us with a lot of wonderful information and feedback. And now we have your name, so we'll know who to ask next time. All of the registrants will be getting a follow-up very soon by email. Make sure you archive it. It's going to be important someday. That will include a link to the slides that we used, as well as a link out to the group notes page, in case you're interested in reading all the minutia. As we said, this is a recording, and we will be figuring out how we might be able to provide access to the recording on some of our institutional online channels. Oh, that email also will include a very, very brief survey about the presentation itself. So if you have time, we would please appreciate if you responded to it, as that will help us to refine our any future presentations that we make to ensure that they're more productive. So again, anything that crops up once you leave here today, let me pop some emails into the chat. You can reach really any of us. If you recognize the name of anyone on the project team, please feel free to reach out. But Jess and Trisha are our co-project managers. And you're also certainly welcome to reach out to me, although I'm just going to send it to Trisha and Jess. So you can streamline it by just taking me out of a loop. Any event, thank you all so much. Hope this was as useful to you as it has been for us. And we hope you all stay healthy. And we'll look forward to getting together with you all again sometime soon.